a city of 1,800,000 people erased from the map in just 3 days. Not an earthquake, not a tsunami, just wind and water. But Hurricane Katrina produced the greatest disaster in modern American history. $125 billion in damage, a figure never seen from any hurricane before it. More than 1,800 lives lost. And the question remains, why so many? To understand Katrina, you must understand New Orleans, a city built where it arguably should never have been. Most of the city sits 1 to 3 meters below sea level. This city is like a giant bowl, surrounded by lake, river, and sea on all sides. A levee system, nearly 560 kilometers long, protected the city from flooding. But this levee system was designed to withstand only a Category 3 storm, not a Category 4 or 5. Katrina would arrive not as a Category 3 storm, but as a Category 5 monster. But to understand why Katrina grew so powerful, we must go back to August 23, 2005. A small tropical disturbance, no different from hundreds of others every summer. But beneath that disturbance lay unusually warm Gulf of Mexico waters, reaching 30 degrees Celsius. Warm water is the fuel of tropical storms, and the Gulf of Mexico was then like a massive tank of gasoline waiting for a spark. Within 2 days, that small disturbance had become a tropical storm and was given a name, Katrina. On August 25th, Katrina made its first landfall in Florida as a Category 1 storm, almost harmless. Then it entered the Gulf of Mexico, and everything changed completely. In just 9 hours, Katrina jumped from Category 2 to Category 5, a rate of intensification rare even for meteorologists. Wind speeds reached 280 kilometers per hour, faster than the world's fastest high-speed train. Central pressure dropped to 912 millibars, one of the lowest ever recorded in the Atlantic Basin. August 28th, New Orleans officials issued the first mandatory evacuation of the entire city in its history. More than 1,200,000 people got in their cars and left, creating one of the largest evacuations in American history. But tens of thousands could not leave. No car, no money, no place to go. About 20,000 people gathered at the Superdome, designated as the shelter of last resort. The night of August 28th into the morning of August 29th, Katrina made landfall. At 6:10 in the morning on August 29th, 2005, the eye made landfall at Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. It was no longer Category 5. Katrina had weakened slightly to Category 3 at landfall, but remained extremely dangerous. But wind speed was not the most terrifying aspect of Katrina. It was the storm surge. Storm surge is when a hurricane pushes an entire mass of ocean water onto land, like a giant wall of water moving with the storm. Katrina produced storm surge heights of up to 8.5 meters in some coastal areas of Mississippi. Imagine this, standing on your ground floor, then within a few hours, water rising above your head. That is what hundreds of thousands of people along the Mississippi and Louisiana coastlines faced that morning. But while the Mississippi coast took the direct surge, the greatest tragedy was unfolding somewhere else, New Orleans. By late morning on the 29th, the storm had passed and skies began to clear. Those who remained breathed a sigh of relief. Then the levees began to fail and New Orleans began to sink. Not because storm surge directly overtopped the levees, but because sustained water pressure for too long collapsed the soil foundation beneath. The 17th Street Canal levee failed at around 5 in the morning, before the storm had even fully made landfall. Then the London Avenue Canal failed. Then the Industrial Canal failed as well. Within a matter of hours, 80% of New Orleans was underwater. In the lower Ninth Ward, water rose so fast that residents had no time to escape their homes. Floodwater here reached depths of 3 to 4 meters, deep enough to completely submerge every home's ground floor. 83,000 homes were completely destroyed. 1 million people lost their homes. But the property damage figures tell only part of the story. The more heartbreaking part is what happened to those left behind. Tens of thousands stranded on rooftops with no food, no drinking water, no information. People waiting in 37 degrees Celsius heat with nothing but the hope that someone would come to help. US Coast Guard helicopters began rescue operations from the very first day. Within 1 week, the Coast Guard conducted more than 33,000 rescues, an unprecedented record. But at the Superdome, conditions were deteriorating rapidly as essential supplies ran out. Water, electricity, sanitation, all collapsed within 24 hours. 20,000 people trapped in a building with no power, no clean water, under the summer heat of New Orleans. The US federal government response was heavily criticized for being slow and disorganized. FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, failed to deploy sufficient resources in those critical early days. Meanwhile, volunteers from everywhere, fishermen, boat owners, ordinary citizens, self-organized into the Cajun Navy to rescue thousands. This was one of the most beautiful moments of the disaster, when ordinary people did extraordinary things. On August 31st, the National Guard and federal military began arriving in large numbers. But for many people, help arrived too late. 1,833 people lost their lives, more than half of them elderly people over 60. Many of them could not evacuate because they had no car, because of illness, because no one came to get them. This is what researchers later called disaster inequality. Not everyone is equal in the face of natural disaster. The lower Ninth Ward, where most residents were low-income African Americans, flooded the most severely and recovered the most slowly. Meanwhile, an environmental crisis was quietly unfolding beneath the floodwaters. The floodwater in New Orleans was not ordinary water. It was a mixture of sewage, oil, industrial chemicals, and heavy metals. The EPA later confirmed floodwater contained lead, arsenic, and coliform bacteria at levels many times above safety standards. To drain the floodwater from New Orleans, pumping stations ran continuously for 43 days. And as the water receded, what emerged was a scene this city had never seen before. A layer of mud, several centimeters thick, covered the entire city, saturated with toxins from the floodwater mixture. The affected area covered more than 93,000 square kilometers, larger than all of England. More than 300,000 homes were destroyed or severely damaged across the entire impact zone. The cities of Biloxi and Gulfport in Mississippi nearly completely wiped off the face of the earth. At its peak, more than 1,800,000 people were living in shelters and temporary housing. New Orleans' population dropped from 1,800,000 people to fewer than 200,000 after the storm. A city nearly abandoned, silent as a ghost town. But now, pause and consider one thing. This was not an unavoidable natural disaster. Engineers and scientists had been warning about the danger of New Orleans' levee system for many decades. In 2001, a series of articles in the Times-Picayune precisely described the scenario of a major hurricane flooding New Orleans. In 2004, FEMA conducted a disaster simulation called Hurricane Pam, accurately recreating exactly what Katrina would do. But the funding to upgrade the levees was never sufficiently allocated. This is the most expensive lesson Katrina taught America. Natural disasters are not only caused by nature, they are also made by human choices. Now consider this number. The cost to upgrade the entire levee system before the storm was approximately $2.5 billion. Katrina's actual damage, $125 billion. 50 times the amount needed to prevent the disaster. After Katrina, the US Congress allocated $14.6 billion to rebuild New Orleans' flood protection system. This new system, called the Greater New Orleans Hurricane and Storm Damage Risk Reduction System, was completed in 2012. But the question remains, is the new system strong enough to withstand another Katrina? The new system is designed to withstand a 100-year Category 3 storm. A storm with a 1 in 100-year probability, but Katrina was a Category 5 storm, and climate change is making storms stronger and more frequent. NOAA scientists have documented that Gulf of Mexico's surface temperatures have continued rising since the 1990s. That means the fuel that creates storms like Katrina is not diminishing, it is increasing. A 2020 study published in Nature Climate Change concluded that the global number of Category 4 and 5 storms is increasing. But climate change is not only making storms stronger, it is also raising sea levels. Louisiana is losing land faster than anywhere else in the United States, approximately the area of a football field every hour. Wetlands and coastal marshes are the natural shield protecting New Orleans from storm surge. Every 4 kilometers of coastal marsh can absorb and reduce storm surge height by approximately 30 centimeters. But Louisiana has lost nearly 5,000 square kilometers of wetland since 1930. Losing wetlands means New Orleans becomes progressively more vulnerable with every subsequent storm. This raises a difficult question. Should New Orleans continue to exist in its current location? New Orleans has a history of more than 300 years, an irreplaceable center of culture, music, and cuisine in America. But sea levels are projected to rise an additional 30 to 90 centimeters by the end of this century. For a city already below sea level, every additional centimeter is another layer of danger. But the story of Katrina is not only a story about a storm, it is also a story of rebirth. Communities that had lost everything gradually came together, rebuilding homes, schools, and hospitals from the rubble. By 2015, New Orleans' population had recovered to approximately 380,000 people, though still below pre-storm levels. But one question remains unanswered. Those who never returned, where did they go? Hundreds of thousands of New Orleans residents resettled in Houston, Atlanta, Baton Rouge, and never returned. Katrina created one of the largest internal migrations in U.S. history since the Great Depression. Now look at the full picture. Katrina was not just a storm, it was the moment America had to look in the mirror. It simultaneously exposed 3 crises: infrastructure failure, social inequality, and emergency response breakdown. And each of those crises had been warned about in advance. None were truly surprising to those who were paying attention. This is the most important thing Katrina taught the world. Disasters begin long before the storm appears on radar. Since Katrina, the United States completely overhauled its federal emergency management system. The Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act of 2006 completely restructured how FEMA operates. Hurricane early warning systems were upgraded. Storm track forecasts are now far more accurate than in 2005. Mandatory evacuation systems were improved. Transportation plans for people without cars were integrated into emergency plans. In 2012, when Superstorm Sandy struck the U.S. East Coast, the federal response was far faster and more organized. This is one of the rare positive outcomes of tragedy. A terrible disaster taught humanity how to defend itself better. But the most costly lesson remains one that cannot be taught in a meeting room or training exercise. Preparation must begin long before disaster strikes. Now consider this. Katrina was not the strongest hurricane ever to make landfall in the United States. Hurricane Camille in 1969 made landfall with greater intensity, but caused far less damage because infrastructure was different. What made Katrina the greatest disaster was not the storm's power, but the fragility of the city it targeted. This is the lesson that urban planners, engineers, and government leaders worldwide were forced to internalize after Katrina. The Netherlands, a country where 2/3 of its area lies below sea level, sent engineers to study the New Orleans levee failures. The Dutch Delta Works, considered one of the 7 wonders of the modern world, became the gold standard New Orleans now looks to for lessons. But the Netherlands took hundreds of years to build that system, beginning after the devastating flood disaster of 1953 that killed nearly 2,000 people. The greatest disasters in human history have often been the catalyst for the greatest changes. Katrina forced the United States to confront uncomfortable truths about aging infrastructure nationwide. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, U.S. infrastructure received a D+ rating in the 2021 assessment, meaning it needs nearly complete overhaul. This is the hidden legacy of Katrina. It exposed not just New Orleans levees, but America's entire fragile infrastructure system. And now, nearly 20 years after Katrina, some scientific questions remain completely unanswered. Question 1. What percentage did climate change contribute to Katrina's intensity? Question 2. If the levee system had been built correctly to design specifications from the beginning, would the disaster have occurred? Post-storm investigations found that numerous levee sections had not been constructed according to design specifications. Human error, not nature. Question 3. And this is the hardest one. Can we truly protect coastal cities in the 21st century? Miami, Jakarta, Mumbai, Shanghai, all facing threats similar to New Orleans, but on a much larger scale. Jakarta is sinking at a rate of 25 centimeters per year in some areas, faster than any other major city on Earth. Indonesia decided to relocate its capital from Jakarta to Nusantara, partly because Jakarta is sinking too fast. This is the first time in modern history a country has relocated its capital largely for climate adaptation reasons. Katrina, a storm in Louisiana, is indirectly shaping policy decisions in Indonesia, the Netherlands, Japan, and dozens of other nations. This is the most remarkable thing about natural disasters. The lessons from one catastrophe in one place can save millions of lives elsewhere. Japan, a nation that regularly faces powerful typhoons, incorporated many lessons from Katrina into its own storm defense systems. And now, let's see what happened to New Orleans itself in the storms that came after Katrina. In 2021, Hurricane Ida struck Louisiana as a Category 4 storm, nearly equivalent to Katrina at landfall. The New Orleans levee system held firm. The city did not flood, as it did in 2005. This is the most concrete proof that investing in disaster defense infrastructure genuinely works. But Hurricane Ida caused more than $13 billion in damage outside New Orleans' levee protection system in unprotected rural Louisiana areas. This shows that protecting one city is not enough. Entire vulnerable regions need protection. And here is where the Katrina story touches something larger than any city or any storm. The Earth is warming, and that means oceans are warming and storing more energy. More energy in the oceans means fuel for stronger tropical storms, higher storm surges, and higher sea levels all at once. An MIT study from 2013 estimated that damage from tropical storms could double by the end of this century. That means a future Katrina, occurring over a warmer ocean, targeting an unprepared coastal city, could cause $250 billion in damage. But this is not a story about despair. It is a story about choices. Humanity already knows how to build effective flood protection systems. The Netherlands has proven it. Humanity knows how to provide effective early warning and evacuation. Japan has proven it with its tsunami warning system. The question is not whether we can do it. It is whether we choose to do it. Katrina placed that question on the table, not just for America, but for the entirety of civilization living alongside the ocean. More than 3 billion people, half the world's population, live within 100 kilometers of a coastline. And all those cities are watching what happens to New Orleans, to see whether it becomes a lesson or just another painful chapter in history. And New Orleans is trying to become a lesson, not a warning. Louisiana's $50 billion wetland restoration project is one of the largest ecosystem restoration efforts in history. But even that plan cannot completely stop the land loss. It can only slow the process. This is the harsh reality that science and engineering must confront. Sometimes, nature is changing faster than humanity's ability to respond. And here is the question future generations will have to answer. Are there places where humans simply should not live? This is a concept scientists call managed retreat, controlled withdrawal from areas that cannot be protected. Some Pacific Island nations, Kiribati, Tuvalu, Marshall Islands, are negotiating to purchase land in other countries to relocate their entire populations. For the first time in modern history, nations are disappearing. Not from war, not from internal conflict, but from water. Katrina, the 2005 storm in New Orleans, was the first chapter in a much larger story playing out across the entire planet. And the central question the world has been trying to answer ever since is, can humanity learn from disaster faster than disasters occur? Looking back over the past 20 years, the answer appears to be yes, but not fast enough. New Orleans' new levee system saved the city from Ida in 2021. That is genuine progress. But Louisiana continues losing wetlands faster than restoration speed. That is an unsolved challenge. And sea levels continue rising at an accelerating rate. That is an undeniable scientific reality. This is what Katrina left behind. Not just rubble, not just lessons about levees, not just questions about inequality. Katrina left one large question hanging over every coastal city in the world. Are we prepared enough? Look at New Orleans today, a city that is living, dancing, cooking, making music. This is the city that survived the worst disaster in modern American history and chose to persist. Every home rebuilt in the lower Ninth Ward is an answer to the question, should we continue? But as sea levels continue rising and as storms continue intensifying, the city will have to keep finding new answers. And those answers are not only New Orleans' responsibility, they are everyone's responsibility. Because what destroyed New Orleans was not an exceptional storm. It was a perfectly ordinary storm, landing on an unprepared city. Science warned us. Engineers warned us. History warned us. And the disaster still happened. Not because no one knew, but because no one acted early enough. This is the final and most important lesson of Katrina. Knowledge without action has no value. And the question Katrina sends to the future is, next time, will we act before, or will we wait for yet another disaster? New Orleans still stands, below sea level, surrounded by water, protected by levees, and by human will. It stands because people who lost everything chose to rebuild. It stands because engineers learned from mistakes and built a better protection system. And it stands as a reminder that every disaster carries within it a choice. We let it define us, or we redefine ourselves from the rubble. Katrina asked us that question 20 years ago, and our answer is still being written.